Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. So welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's take a look at today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. Today I have chosen 7 important articles from the Delhi edition of the Hindu. We have few important articles for the mains exam and few small articles that are relevant for the prelims examination. So let's cover all these topics one by one and ensure that it's a comprehensive discussion so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are liking this initiative, do support us with your likes, your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now before we start, we have an announcement about Conquer Prelims, which is a free crash course which is going on our YouTube channel and as well as on the Unacademy app. As part of the static crash course, today Mukesh sir will be taking up the next geography session at 6 p.m. And as part of the current affairs phase of the crash course, today we will be starting with government schemes by Asta ma'am. This session will be held at 7:30 p.m. right here on our YouTube channel. So do attend these sessions live, and to get the links for these sessions, you just have to join our Telegram channel and we will share the links right before the sessions go live. So now let's begin with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at this important article from page number 1. On the front page, we have this article related to the Model Code of Conduct, and the topic is very relevant for Indian polity, both for prelims and as well as for mains. So let's understand what is the context of this article and discuss this topic in slight detail. See, during this election season, you might have seen how our political parties have become very innovative and creative with their advertisements. The article here is specifically focused on political advertisements and what political parties can do in their advertisements and what they can't do in their advertisements. Recently, a controversy broke out over few political ads by the BJP, which seemed to target the Trinamool Congress in West Bengal. The Trinamool Congress perceived these advertisements by the BJP as derogatory, as degenerating. And the Trinamool Congress approached the Election Commission and urged the Election Commission to issue a notice to the BJP and stop these ads from being aired. Parallelly, the Trinamool Congress also approached the Calcutta High Court. The Calcutta High Court placed an injunction, issued a stay order on these advertisements by labeling these ads by the BJP as slanderous and derogatory in nature against the Trinamool Congress and its leaders. So following this ruling of the Calcutta High Court, the BJP approached the Supreme Court. And now the Supreme Court has upheld the orders of the Calcutta High Court and it has refused to interfere with the orders that were issued earlier by the Calcutta High Court. So while passing this ruling, the Supreme Court has made some important observations. The Supreme Court has said that political parties should not treat each other as enemies. They might be political rivals, they might be opponents in the political sphere, but they can't extend political rivalry to turn that into enmity towards each other and degenerate each other and thus bring down the quality of political debates. The Supreme Court has said that such behavior by political parties, especially during elections, it could affect the interest of the voters. It denigrates the electoral process. It devalues the democratic process itself, and it essentially violates the Model Code of Conduct as well. So the Supreme Court has said that prima facie it appears that in these political ads by the BJP targeting the Trinamool Congress, it appeared that the ads were derogatory in nature, slanderous in nature, and they were disparaging. Not all the content of the ads were based on facts. It appeared that some of them were largely based on misinformation. So on these grounds, the Supreme Court has not interfered with the orders of the Calcutta High Court, and it has essentially upheld the injunction issued against these political advertisements. So this is what the Supreme Court has observed. So now, in this context, we should examine what kind of conduct rules apply on political parties and even the candidates when the model code of conduct is in place, especially when it comes to political campaigns, propaganda, and advertisements? Are there any conduct rules which are specified under the model code of conduct? So that is what we will examine. But please note down that the Supreme Court has clearly pointed out that political parties, they might be rivals to each other, but they should not treat each other as enemies. They should not target one's personal life, which has no connection with their public life. They should not run any such campaigns which degenerates the political debate, which undermines the very confidence of the voters in the electoral process and only breeds more enmity and divisions in the society. So such advertisements are not encouraged, they are not tolerated as per the existing rules and the code of conduct. So if we look at the model code of conduct, within the MCC, there are 7 specific provisions that deal with the general conduct of political parties and candidates. Under the Model Code of Conduct issued by the Election Commission of India, which kicks into effect once the elections are notified, and it stays in effect until the elections results are declared. So during this period, when the Model Code of Conduct is in place, there are few important provisions, important rules that the parties have to follow, the candidates have to follow as part of the general conduct expected from them. So now we will take a look at these 7 basic codes that parties and candidates are expected to follow as part of the general provisions under the MCC. The first important provision, which is relevant to what we were discussing, is that political parties have to refrain from any derogatory criticism of their opponents. The Model Code says that any criticism of a political opponent or a rival, it should be based on their track record, their past performance. There should not be any personal attacks. The personal life of a leader or the personal private matters of an individual, which has no relevance in the public domain, should not be dragged into a political slugfest. Any such criticism by a political party, it should be confined to the public nature of the work of the party and the candidate. So this is something which is clearly mentioned under the Model Code of Conduct, but all of you know how Indian leaders and various parties in India, not just the BJP, even the other political parties as well, they resort to highly derogatory, slanderous criticism, even dragging one's private life into the public domain. And this essentially undermines the nature of our elections. It undermines the very electoral process in the country and hurts voter interests. That's why the Supreme Court has pointed out that political parties might be rivals, but don't behave like enemies. Don't slander each other. Don't pass such derogatory comments or air such derogatory ads targeting one's personal life or spreading criticism and propaganda based on misinformation, based on completely inaccurate or those facts which are not established. So this is essentially provided under the MCC as well as part of the general conduct expected by the parties and the candidates. The parties and candidates are also expected to not spread any unnecessary allegations which are not verifiable, which are not rooted in facts. So whatever we were discussing in the current context, in the current issue between BJP and Trinamool Congress regarding political advertisements, these provisions under the MCC become very relevant. It's on the basis of these provisions that the Supreme Court and the Calcutta High Court issued an injunction and they have stopped the airing of these ads by the BJP. Now, apart from this, there are few other general code of conduct which is part of the MCC. So let's take a look at the other 6 provisions as well. This provision especially is extremely important. As part of the general conduct, political parties and candidates are in a way prohibited to not seek votes on the lines of caste, religion, linguistic divide, regional divide, etc. They can't exploit the social divisions and seek votes in the name of religion, in the name of caste, etc. So such divisive campaigns are clearly discouraged under the MCC. Then Political parties and candidates, they cannot turn places of worship into a political tool. They can't use temples, mosques, and other places of worship as a forum for their propaganda. They can't turn places of worship into a platform through which they seek votes, through which they appeal to the believers, to the voters, and seek votes on caste, communal lines, etc. This is discouraged under the model code. But as we have seen during this election season itself, several top leaders and various parties have repeatedly exercised this practice. They have been involved in this practice where they have sought votes on religious lines, used places of worship to seek votes. But still, the Election Commission has often found itself to be lacking when it comes to taking action against these parties and candidates. The other important provisions of the general conduct includes that candidates and parties cannot resort to corrupt practices which are designated as corrupt under election law. For example, bribing the voter or arranging transportation for voters from their house to the polling booth, which is in a way a bribe, or intimidating the voters, threatening the voters to cast vote in a certain manner to favor a candidate or a party. So all such practices which parties and candidates might resort to, which seeks to push the voters to vote in a certain manner, is discouraged under the model code of conduct. Parties and candidates are prohibited from resorting to such practices, and they all get classified as corrupt practices. So bribing a voter, intimidating a voter, or breaking the model code, for example, campaigning within 100 meters of a polling booth, it's prohibited under the MCC. So if such practices are noted, they'll be treated as corrupt electoral practices, and accordingly, the legal charges can be pressed against those candidates and parties. Next, there's another important provision under the MCC which protects the right of every individual for a undisturbed, peaceful home life, which essentially means that political parties and their party workers, they can't come in front of your house and disturb the peace at your house by protesting, by campaigning in front of your house. Let's say you have a different political opinion. Now, let's say the candidate in your constituency gets to know what is your political affiliation, and tomorrow if the party workers of the opponent side, if they come in front of your house and deliberately campaign and disturb the peace in your neighborhood, this is not tolerated. This is again unacceptable behavior by a party or a candidate. Now let's say there is a political candidate and he has a rival, he or she has a political rival. So the rivals and their party workers can't come and carry out campaigns or protests or even disturb the peace in front of the house of that particular candidate. So such practices are prohibited. It protects the rights of the individuals. It essentially prohibits the parties and candidates from targeting individuals for their political inclinations. Next, if a party has to, let's say, put up banners or its party flag or symbol, it can't use any land or property without getting the permission of the owner. Tomorrow, you can't have a party coming into your property, your house, and putting up slogans or throwing pamphlets into your house, or let's say putting up a flag or a banner inside your property. To do that, they have to get your permission, and this is mandated under the General Code of Conduct within the MCC. So this again protects individual rights. It essentially gives the owner of a property full rights, and it allows the owner to ensure that their land, their property, their house is not misused for political purposes by political parties. And finally, political parties are prohibited from targeting each other during processions, rallies, etc. Now imagine one rival candidate is taking out a political rally, and let's say the opponent also conducts a rally deliberately in the same locality on the same street. So such practices are prohibited because it could easily lead to escalation of tensions between the party workers. It could lead to a clash resulting in violence as well. Or it could lead to a disturbing scenario where the tensions are high between the two opponents, which could essentially vitiate the electoral atmosphere. So any such disruption of electoral campaigns, proceedings, rallies by the rival parties, it is discouraged and prohibited under the general conduct expected under the Model Code of Conduct. So these provisions are extremely crucial as far as Indian elections are concerned. But of course, the MCC itself is not legally enforceable. It lacks a legal backing. But however, the Election Commission is responsible, it's accountable for ensuring that these codes of conduct are followed strictly by all the parties and candidates. So this is where many questions have been raised as well regarding the integrity of the Election Commission and its ability to act fearlessly against all parties and leaders without any fear or favor. So on this note, we conclude the discussion on the first topic. Now let's look at the next article from page number 7. On page number 7, the Hindu brings out a data point, or essentially a data sheet, that gives us a lot of insight about India's trade relations with China and also India's trade relations with the US. If you remember, yesterday we actually spoke about this topic. Based on data brought out by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, we discussed yesterday that amongst the top 10 trading partners, India runs a trade deficit with 9 of our trading partners. Within the top 10 list of trading partners for India, which includes US, China, Russia, and many others, we have a trade deficit with 9 of our top 10 trading partners. Now, this is quite concerning because with some countries, the trade deficit is quite unsustainable, especially with China. And there is also a degree of dependency that India has on imports from some of these countries, especially on Chinese imports. So this article today provides us more insight and more data, both for prelims and mains. That's why I feel this topic is again very, very important. So let's look a little deeper into this topic and let's understand the nature of India-China trade relations. And also let's evaluate and compare this with India's trade relations with the US. And let's also get some more insight into the trade equation that we have with Russia and few other partner countries. So the development that was reported yesterday was that China has again emerged as India's topmost trading partner. So when we say top trading partners of India, it basically takes into account the imports and exports. The total bilateral trade volume, which is a combination of the imports and exports, is taken into account. So according to the data, India's trade volume with China has crossed $118 billion. It has just overtaken the United States by a few million dollars. Even with US, our bilateral trade volume is 118 billion. So China has overtaken the US by a very narrow margin. But this is not the first time. In fact, if you look at the last 1 decade, in the last 10 years, 6 times China has emerged as the top trading partner of India, and 4 times the US has emerged as the top trading partner of India. So this is a very valuable insight for you. So the top 2 trading partners of India, they happen to be China and United States. Is that clear? The position keeps interchanging depending on the total volume of imports and exports. But the point to remember is that over the last decade or so, China and US have been the largest trading partners for India. So out of the last 10 years, 6 times China has been at the top, followed by US at the second position. And in 4 years, US has been at the top, followed by China at the second position. So there could be a prelims question as well, based on these patterns of trade that India has with key partner countries. Now, the concern for India is the trade deficit that we are running with China quite consistently. In fact, over the last 2 decades, for the last 20 years, India has been running a consistently high trade deficit, and almost every year it keeps on increasing. Also, the disturbing trend is that the pattern of trade is unsustainable because India's exports have largely remained stagnant when it comes to the Chinese market. We barely export few goods, commodities and services into China, right? We have very limited opportunities as such. We have limited market access, and Indian companies also are not able to compete in the Chinese market. So due to various factors, due to the trade barriers created by China as well, Indian exports have not really jumped or increased over the years. It has largely remained stagnant, and we have very minimal exports towards China. But however, we are importing a lot from the country. China has become a top supplier of many essential goods and commodities, and this creates an import dependency for India. We will look at the data in a short while regarding in which sector or in which specific industry we have a lot of dependency over Chinese imports. I'll come to that point. But the first thing you need to understand is that it's a very unhealthy trading relationship that we have developed with China. We are largely exporting raw materials. We are carrying out very minimal value addition. And from China, we are importing finished goods, finished commodities like mobile phones, semiconductor chips, integrated circuits, or APIs or active pharmaceutical ingredients, or power transformer equipment. So such finished goods and commodities are being imported, right? Which means China is making value addition through its manufacturing and selling high quality goods and expensive goods to India, and India has become dependent on those Chinese goods and commodities and even services. So this becomes a very unhealthy equation, and many experts even call this a new form of colonization. Just like the British, right? They looted raw materials from India, carried out value addition in Europe, powered the industrial revolution of Europe, and dumped the finished goods on the Indian market, thus destroying the native industry as well. So almost a similar pattern has emerged between India and China, where we are supplying some raw materials with very minimal value addition and largely importing finished goods and commodities from China, and the trade deficit has ballooned in the last couple of decades. Whereas if you compare this with United States, it's almost the opposite. If you look at the India-US trade relationship, you can say that it's almost exactly the opposite. With the United States, our trade surplus has increased consistently. India has a trade surplus with the US. We have a trade surplus of $37 billion with United States. Is that clear? So compared to this, right, with China, we have a $85 billion deficit. In the previous slide, I had given a table of the top 10 trading partners of India, right? If you paid attention to it, you would have noticed that amongst the top 10 trading partners, with 9 of them, we are running a massive deficit, especially with China at the top. Look at the quantum of the deficit. It's $85 billion out of a $118 billion trading relationship, which means we are barely exporting around $25 to $30 billion worth of goods and importing $85 billion worth of commodities. So that is a unfair and even unequal trading relationship. Now compare that with the US. With the US, India is running a trade surplus of $37 billion. The total trade volume is 118 billion, right? And India has a surplus, which means we are exporting more into the US market than what we are importing. So US becomes a critical market for Indian producers, for Indian exporters. From agricultural produce to machinery to software products, India has a lot of exports headed towards the United States, and the US happens to be a huge market for India, particularly for Indian exports and Indian producers. Now look at the graph here. The graph is very insightful. It gives us a lot of inputs and data from based on the trends in the trade between India, China, and India, US. This graph here is depicting the trend in exports and imports with China and US. So please pay attention to the graph. You can see how imports from China has gone up consistently. The red line over here at the top, you can see how the imports with China has grown quite consistently over the years. But look at our exports to China. The last line, the red colored line over here at the bottom, it has been almost flat with slight increase and decrease here and there. Our exports are very low in volume, right? And the curve also remains very stagnant with very minimal increase and decrease. Whereas our imports have grown exponentially from China. So naturally, there is a huge trade deficit. Look at the gap between the export and import with regard to India-China relationship. Now compare that with the US. With United States, our exports have increased at a faster rate compared to the imports. See, with US, imports have gone up. We are importing a lot from the US as well. But our exports have increased at a much faster rate, thus giving us a trade surplus which has been consistently increasing over the years. So we register a trade surplus here. Even though imports have gone up in the last few years, our exports have increased even further. You can see a spike over here in the last few years. And that explains the trade surplus India has with the US. So such a trade relationship could always be detrimental for our domestic economy and for even our geopolitical interests. Because as we've discussed in many sessions, China is known to leverage economic advantages and use that to punish a country to gain geopolitical advantages. Given that India, China have been hostile to each other, we have a standing border dispute, we are seen as strategic rivals in the Indo-Pacific. It becomes all the more important to balance this trade relationship, to achieve a balance in the trade equation, and that has been a pursuit for India. India's complaint is that China does not give easy access to Indian producers and Indian companies. China has put up a lot of trade barriers that limits market access to Indian companies. We even have many cases filed against each other at the WTO dispute settlement mechanism. Right? But the core point is that India's weak manufacturing and China's strength in manufacturing is what leads to this situation. In many sectors, Indian industries are heavily dependent on the goods, commodities produced by China, right? Because there are no other alternatives, no viable alternatives. So this dependency is what worries India, it creates concern for India. Now look at the other graph given by Hindu. You can see how China is right at the bottom, which marks the highest trade deficit for India amongst all the trading partners. Right? We have a trade deficit of $85 billion with the country, with US being on the other end at the top, with a surplus of $36 to $37 billion. Now, in between, all the major trading partners of India are listed. We have a surplus with some of them, we have a deficit with many of them. But there's something interesting that you need to observe, which I think is important for the exam. After China, can you see which is the second country with whom we have the largest trade deficit? It is Russia. As far as the previous financial year is concerned, FY 23-24 is concerned, Russia is the next country with whom we have the largest trade deficit. A deficit of $57 billion. So what explains this deficit? It is the sudden increase in oil imports from Russia following the Russia-Ukraine war. Over the last 2 years, India has become one of the biggest buyers of Russian oil, and we have even bypassed the Western economic sanctions against Russia. So as the sanctions hit Russia, Russia couldn't export its oil everywhere. It relied on few partners like India, China, etc., who were ready to bypass the sanctions. Russia sold the oil at a discounted price, and India lapped up most of the Russian oil because this would help in securing our energy security, to reduce our import bills. So India became one of the largest buyers of Russian oil over the last couple of years, and that is what explains this large deficit that we have with Russia. But however, we have turned this into an advantage. What India has done is that we have used the Russian oil to not just meet our domestic requirement, to not just meet the domestic crude oil requirement, but we have pushed this through our petrochemical industries, because India is a hub of petrochemical industries. We have turned this into various petrochemical products, from petrol, diesel to many other products. And we are re-exporting this to Europe, because European countries cannot buy Russian oil due to the sanctions. the European powers, especially the Western countries, right, they have followed the American sanctions. They themselves have levied sanctions against Russia as well. So they can't directly purchase Russian oil. So instead, they have been buying the same petrochemical products processed by India, and this has become a great opportunity for India. Right? We have taken Russian oil because no one else was buying it, right? And we have turned this into various products and re-exported this into the European market itself, thus creating a great opportunity for India's petrochemical industry. That explains why countries like Netherlands, for example, can you see Netherlands over here at the top, right below United States? With Netherlands, India has registered a huge trade surplus of $17 to $18 billion. This is largely because of the petrochemical exports of India. So from Netherlands, it's being supplied to other European countries. Understood? So Netherlands is buying the petrochemical products from India, which is of Russian origin, and then resupplying it to other European countries. So in a way, the Western sanctions have become quite ineffective, and India has had a major role to play in this. That's why some European countries, they accused India of being a laundromat country. UK and France and few others, and even Germany and others, they blamed India. They called India a laundromat, a country which is laundering Russian oil, taking Russian oil at a cheaper cost, turning it into petrochemical products and exporting it back into the European market. So that is why Netherlands became our important trading partner with a massive trade surplus of $18 billion. Then within our neighborhood, within the South Asia region, the most important trading partner for India is Bangladesh. Amongst all the neighboring countries, right, India-Bangladesh trade relationship is the largest trade relationship in South Asia, and we have a trade surplus of nearly $9 to $10 billion. This is another important insight, both for your prelims and your mains. So let's say there is a neighborhood-based question. You should know that India's ties with Bangladesh, the trade relations, it's the largest trade relationship within our immediate neighborhood in the South Asia region, right? So India is a key supplier of essential commodities to Bangladesh. Bangladesh exports a few commodities to India as well, but we have a trade surplus with Bangladesh. That is why India and Bangladesh are negotiating a free trade agreement. Given the importance of this bilateral trade relationship, the two countries are negotiating an FTA. Is that clear? Next, few other European countries, UK, France, Italy, etc. We have a trade surplus with these European countries as well. So that shows how important the European market is to India. The European Union, if you take the EU collectively as one single market, the EU is also one of the most important markets for India, and it is one amongst the top 3 trading partners for India. Along with US and China, the EU happens to be one of the most important markets for India's farmers, producers, manufacturing industries, exporters. The EU is a critical market. So this is the important data, the insight that you can get by looking at such articles. Now coming to my last point, if China is the largest trading partner for India and we are importing a lot from China, the question is, what are we importing? Right, I said we have an import dependency on China. In which sectors do we have an import dependency? What kind of goods, what kind of commodities are we importing? Again, based on this, there can be a specific prelims question, or in general, there can be a mains question on the nature of trade between India and China. So without these details, you cannot answer this question. You can't write random points. It has to be very specific. So please pay attention to this. Please look at the trade basket between India and China and what exactly are we importing from China. Out of the entire trade relationship that we have, which is worth around $118 billion, almost $75 billion worth of imports accounted for mobile phones and telephone sets. Largest share is for the electrical industry. If you ask me which is the biggest commodity that we are procuring from China, it falls under the electronics and electrical sector or industry. And within the electronics industry, it's mobile phones. India imported $75 billion worth of mobile phones and telephone sets from China. Followed by this, you have automatic data processing machines and units. essentially computing units, computing devices. Next, semiconductor devices, electronic ICs or integrated circuits. So you can clearly understand that the top four imports, of India from China, they are all in the electronics and electrical sector. This is where we have the biggest dependency on China. In other key sectors as well, for example, in pharmaceuticals, even though India is called the pharmacy of the world, we produce the world's largest volume of generic drugs and vaccines, but still we have a great dependency on the raw materials that China provides us. For example, the APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, right, which is the core essence of any drug. Almost 60% of APIs used in the Indian pharma industry comes from China. So there is a critical dependency that exists over there. Same with few antibiotics. With some of the antibiotics, we have a dependency on China, at least with regard to the raw materials. Then automobile industry and power industry. Even these sectors are heavily dependent on Chinese products. Is that clear? In automobiles, in machinery, as well as in the power sector for transformers and power equipment, even mobile switching equipment, the back end of your mobile and internet infrastructure. So all the equipment comes from China. Then even the toy industry, for example. So in many such industries, we have a critical dependency on China. Is that clear? That is the reason why we have such a high volume of imports, and this is what increases the trade deficit. Now, you might suggest, why doesn't India look for other partners? Why can't we procure this from someone else? Why can't we procure mobile phones, electronic circuits, semiconductor chips from others? The problem is there aren't enough suppliers, reliable suppliers, because cost and time is critical when it comes to any export or import. China happens to be the best reliable source for India for many of these critical commodities on which our industries are dependent. Look at the dependency chart. This is another important chart. It shows the extent of dependency we have on Chinese imports. For example, in the mobile sector, we have a 54% dependency, which means we don't have other reliable sources of supply that can provide cheaper and decent quality mobile phones that can meet the demand in the Indian market. So creating alternate sources and building alternate supply chains will be crucial for India to reduce the dependency that we have on China. So one way out is to look out for alternate sources. For example, if you look at semiconductor chips, there are other top producers like Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, even United States. That's exactly what we are doing in the last few years. India is working with all these partner countries to source critical electronic items, from electronic circuits to even semiconductor chips, etc. We're trying to find alternate suppliers from other countries so we can diversify our imports. We need not be dependent solely on China. We are looking to make the supply chains more resilient and diversified so that it reduces our dependency on China. So this can be a short-term solution, short to medium-term solution. But long-term solution has to be self-sufficiency. In the long term, if you have to reduce the dependency and bring down the trade deficit, we have to become self-sufficient, at least in most of the critical sectors. See, in a globalized world, it may not be possible to become entirely self-sufficient. It's not advisable as well. But at least in some critical areas, we should strive for self-sufficiency, and that is the whole vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat. Is that clear? So this article here, all the graphs, the images, they are extremely useful for us because it gives a great insight into the nature of trade India has with China, US, and other top trading partners. Now let's move on to the next article on page number 8. This article is very important for social issues, governance, and even with regard to internal security under prison reforms. The article is focused on prison reforms, and it is particularly focused on women prisoners and their menstrual health. The article's focus is menstruation of women prisoners who are in Indian jails. So this is a very important topic that the article is exploring here. So let's understand the plight of women prisoners in Indian jails when it comes to menstruation, because in general menstruation is seen as a taboo in the Indian society, in general societies around the world, right? They have a lot of stigma attached to the process, the natural process of menstruation. And women face a lot of social discrimination during the period of menstruation, right? And it happens to be a very important social issue and also public health issue, because lack of awareness and the stigmatization of menstruation could lead to unsafe practices, unhygienic practices. It might discourage women from accessing menstrual hygiene products. And this will have a bearing on the sexual and reproductive health of women. So it's an important public health concern. It's an important social issue as well, and an important issue as far as prison reforms are concerned, because here the focus is women prisoners who may not have access to menstrual hygiene. According to data from the National Crime Records Bureau, the NCRB, which is under the Ministry of Home Affairs, there are more than 23,000 women prisoners currently in Indian jail. Is that clear? The data is very important, because if we are talking specifically about menstruation related hygiene and women health, right, specific to women prisoners, knowing how many women are in jail is very important. See, here as well there is a gender-based stigma and bias attached with regard to women prisoners. Society often attaches a value of purity with women and expects women not to commit crimes. But that's not how reality works. There could be women who might commit crimes as well, who might land up in jails, right? But once they land up in jail, they face further discrimination, they face further mistreatment, they face neglect as well, due to the gender bias in our governance, in our policies. The gender bias that exists in the society, right, in general, and the stigma attached with menstruation leads to compounding of the problem for women prisoners in Indian jails. So there are nearly 23 to 24,000 women prisoners in Indian jails, and majority of them, almost 77% of women prisoners, they are in the reproductive age, in the age group of 18 to 50 years, which means they regularly undergo menstruation every month. Now the question is, do they have access to menstrual hygiene products? What is the government doing? What are the prison authorities doing to ensure that women prisoners have access to menstrual hygiene products? So that is the question which is being explored by the writer in this article. According to a recent study conducted in Maharashtra in one of the prisons, the study established that majority of the women in the jails, they did not have access to menstrual hygiene products. From tampons to napkins, sanitary napkins, to even menstrual cups. They were not accessible, they were not available to women prisoners in this prison in Maharashtra where the study was conducted. So it is safe to presume that the trend is similar across Indian jails. See, when it comes to prison management, there is a model prison rule. There is a rule book that specifies the minimum requirements to be provided by prison authorities to the prisoners. The Ministry of Home Affairs, which is responsible for internal security, law and order, right? And of course, state police have the primary responsibility over law and order policing. So MHA has brought out a model rule book, a prison rule book, which is supposed to be followed by the state governments. Because policing, law and order, prison management, they're all state subjects. So state police, state governments are primarily responsible. It's under their jurisdiction. But center can issue a model guideline or a model rule, and that's what the MHA has done. So state prison authorities are expected to follow this model prison rule book, and under the model prison rule book, menstrual hygiene, women health has been clearly mentioned, specifically mentioned. But problem is in implementation. In different states, there is an uneven implementation of the model rules as specified under the rule book. Prison authorities may not implement all the rules. They may not provide access to menstrual hygiene products. And usually they depend on NGOs to provide the assistance. If some NGO ties up with a certain prison and supplies the sanitary napkins or tampons or menstrual cups, only then the women prisoners will have access to these products, or else they will have to be at the mercy of prison authorities. And along with that, the question of hygienic toilets, availability of water, availability of restrooms, these are very crucial issues to be addressed as far as the well-being of women prisoners are concerned. See, generally there is a presumption in the society that prisoners need not be provided any facilities, their rights don't matter, right? They should not be extended any kind of privileges. But that is a wrong way of looking at the rights of prisoners. The prisoners do enjoy a certain right, and in any civilized society, those basic rights have to be respected and provided for. And especially women prisoners, they face several discriminatory issues in prison, and especially menstrual health, their overall sexual reproductive health is something that has to be taken care of by the authorities. Because of unhygienic toilets, due to lack of availability of clean water, due to the lack of restrooms and facilities, many women prisoners suffer from urinary tract infections. Right? This has a bearing on their overall health, and it has an impact on the child that they are going to bear. So this could become a public healthcare issue, and that is the concern here. So that is why it is very essential for the center, the states, the prison authorities to work together to solve and address this problem. Now, if you look at the current initiatives, India does have a lot of progressive initiatives when it comes to menstrual hygiene in the country. For example, Menstrual Hygiene Scheme has been launched by the government of India. Under the Menstrual Hygiene Scheme, the Indian government is distributing the sanitary products, menstrual sanitary and hygiene products at very reasonable cost through the Jan Aushadhi centers. At just 1 rupee per sanitary napkin, Suraksha Suvidha napkins are being distributed so that sanitary napkins are accessible, affordable, available to Indian women at a very reasonable and cheap cost. Studies have shown that in urban areas, menstrual sanitation and hygiene is much better compared to rural areas. So to address the gap, this broad scheme was launched, the Menstrual Hygiene Scheme, through which sanitary napkins are being distributed through Jan Aushadhi Kendras at just 1 rupee per napkin. But however, this benefit does not reach the women prisoners. This is a general scheme for all women in the country. It's not specific to women prisoners. So in 2023, last year, the government has floated a draft National Menstrual Hygiene Policy. Now, this is very important for the issue that we are discussing. Under the draft National Menstrual Hygiene Policy, there is a specific mention of women prisoners, of ensuring equity, of ensuring inclusiveness when it comes to menstrual hygiene and sanitation. Now, this is a very important point. This approach of the government should be appreciated here. The policy says that when it comes to menstrual hygiene, there should be no discrimination of any kind. No one should be left behind, irrespective of which region, which location, right, or the status of women. Every single menstruating woman should have access to sanitation and hygiene products. That is the core objective of the National Menstrual Hygiene Policy. It specifically points out the deficiencies with regard to women prisoners and how women prisoners are a target population of the policy. It identifies that women prisoners don't have access to sanitation products. So this is a very, very important point, and it shows the proactive approach of the government to solve this problem. But however, there are few shortcomings, there are few drawbacks. The policy does not provide a concrete action plan to deliver menstrual hygiene products to women prisoners. It identifies the problem. It identifies that women prisoners are a target population. It clearly points out that they don't have access to menstrual hygiene products. But it does not provide a concrete action plan. It does not offer a specific solution. So what should be done is that all the stakeholders need to come together, right? The Ministry of Home Affairs should be involved in the policy as well, but unfortunately it's been dropped. It's not been included when the policy was drafted. The MHA, along with the state police, the state government and the prison authorities, with involvement of NGOs and civil society, is essential to ensure that menstrual hygiene is extended for women prisoners as well. So that is a way forward. Is that clear? All the concerned stakeholders need to be brought on board. The MHA at the central level, along with Ministry of Women and Child Development. At the state level, the state government, state police, concerned departments and the prison authorities with the NGOs and civil society. So only such involvement of all the stakeholders can help us solve this problem. Right? We need to provide for uniform implementation of the prison rules, the prison manual, the model prison manual which has been brought out by the Home Ministry. The manual talks about women prisoners, talks about their health related issues, but enough is not being done on the ground. So we need a uniform implementation of the prison manual and the rule book brought out by the Home Ministry, and there should be focus on menstrual hygiene for women prisoners as a public health issue. It's not just a social issue, right? It's not just about ensuring that women have access to these products. It's not just a social issue or a gender-based issue. It's a public health issue as well, because menstrual sanitation hygiene is linked with the health of the menstruating woman. So this is the approach needed to address this governance problem and social problem that exists as far as Indian prisons are concerned. Now coming to the next article, on page number 8, we have an important column that is related to environment and ecology. So let's understand what this article deals with. The article is focused on the topic of eco-restoration. So in this article, we'll understand the concept of eco-restoration. We'll also understand the impact of invasive exotic species. So this is the focus of the article. So what is the article dealing with? See, in Kerala, recently the Kerala government has allowed the Kerala Forest Development Corporation to cultivate eucalyptus trees and acacia plants in order to allow the forest department to make some money, right, by harvesting the trees down the line, so that it can make the Forest Department Corporation more financially independent and sustainable. Because the Kerala Forest Development Corporation requires adequate funds to be able to function and to be able to carry out its mandate. So to allow the Kerala Forest Development Corporation to have enough funds to ensure it has financial survivability, the government has allowed the department to cultivate eucalyptus trees and cultivate acacia trees as well, which can be harvested in a few years' time, that can bring additional income to the Forest Development Corporation. Now, why is this such a big issue? It is a big issue because environmental activists have strongly opposed this order of the Kerala government. Environmental groups are strongly opposed to such cultivation of eucalyptus, acacia plants, and even the wattle or wattle trees, because all these are exotic, alien, invasive species which are extremely dangerous to the native species of the Western Ghats. Is that clear? The eucalyptus, or also called the Nilgiri trees in southern India, it's very common in Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and also in parts of Kerala. You might have seen these tall wooded trees. They are very fragrant as well, right? Eucalyptus oil, as you know, has a lot of medicinal cosmetic properties, right? So eucalyptus has a lot of value in the industry. Even in the furniture industry, in the wood industry, eucalyptus trees are very much preferred because they don't branch out, they grow as a straight tall tree, and it's ideally suited for making furniture and for turning it into various products. So eucalyptus is a highly valued raw material in the wood and furniture industry. Plus the eucalyptus leaves and the oil has a lot of value in the medical industry and also in the cosmetic industry, correct? But however, this tree rather, it's not native to India. I don't know how many of you knew this. Many of you might have presumed that eucalyptus, right, it's everywhere in the country. Wherever you go, on the outskirts of every city, there will be eucalyptus plantations. So that would lead one to presume that this is native to India, but it's not. It was introduced in India during colonial times by the British. It's a non-native exotic species, and the worst part, it is invasive, meaning it can spread rapidly, take over entire ecosystems, and it can destroy the plants and shrubs and other leaf-producing plants. So what happens when tall wooded trees take over a forest area filled with plants, shrubs, and leaf-based plants? It directly affects the herbivores, elephants, deers, and other animals which need leaf, right, or plant material to feed upon, right? They will lose the primary source of food, because the eucalyptus trees, which grow very tall in height, right, they don't produce any leaves which are edible at the lower levels. It reduces the food availability for the animals in the forest areas. So eucalyptus cultivation, which has a lot of commercial value, has been preferred by farmers, encouraged by governments as well, but unfortunately it has a detrimental impact on the environment. Now, if you have ever been to the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, or let's say Western Ghats in Karnataka, Kerala, or Tamil Nadu, you will find eucalyptus plantations, right, which have almost overpowered the native plants and native ecosystems. So with reduced availability of food, what will happen? It will lead to man-animal conflict. Animals will venture out of the forest if there aren't enough readily available food material in the forest. Right? The herbivores will start venturing out and the carnivores will follow them. So this could lead to aggravated incidents of man-animal conflict, right? And it could turn into a disastrous situation where there could be loss of human life, or there could be anger against the animals, which are frequently venturing into villages, towns, carrying out destruction. And this could turn into revenge or hate against the wild animals for no mistake of theirs. So this becomes a very significant environmental challenge. So there are many such trees like acacia and others. They have a very long growing period. Eucalyptus, for example, will take at least 9 years to reach the desired productivity level, and then it is harvested. Acacia, I think, has a life cycle of 18 years. One harvest cycle will take around 18 years, but it will fetch a lot of money for the producer because they all have a lot of commercial value. But the problem is they are exotic species. They are not native to our ecosystem. They are invasive. They take over the forest land and they don't allow enough space for plants, shrubs, and grass and leaf producing plants, which are absolutely essential in a forest ecosystem because that is the primary source of food for the animals in the forest. So this has a cyclical effect. So there have been many efforts made to curb eucalyptus cultivation to minimize the spread of such invasive exotic species. Kerala itself had put a stop on a further spread of eucalyptus cultivation. But now its decision to grant approval to the Forest Development Corporation to set up eucalyptus plantation and acacia forests just so that it can become financially independent is highly controversial on environmental grounds because there are these challenges, problems associated with it. Is that clear? So, eco-restoration is a concept. It's an environment conservation concept under which such ecosystems where forest land has been destroyed by exotic invasive species, if they are restored with natural forests, such a conservation project is called eco-restoration. Now imagine a patch of forest land, right? The native plants and shrubs have been destroyed by the exotic invasive species which have taken over. So if this patch of forest land is restored back to its natural condition, if the natural forest is restored by overcoming the threat posed by the invasive exotic species, then that is called as eco-restoration. The native ecology is being restored through a conservation effort. So Kerala has pioneered eco-restoration. For example, in Idukki district, where similar problems were being faced, the Kerala government and forest department, they worked with the UN development program. They received funding from World Bank, NABARD, and also under the CAMPA funds. And they restored some of the destroyed forest land because of invasive exotic species, and they restored the natural forests. So this is a successful case of eco-restoration in Kerala. So now it is quite shocking that in the same state approvals have been provided, that to a forest, to a government-owned entity, the Forest Development Corporation, to cultivate eucalyptus and acacia for commercial purposes, to ensure that the corporation can become financially sustainable. So this has environmental consequences, and that is the reason why these topics are in news. Understood? So you should understand the role of invasive exotic species and the concept of eco-restoration. So now let's head towards the prelims section, and let's take a quick look at the prelims articles in today's newspaper. On the front page, the Hindu carries this image from Papua New Guinea of a devastating landslide that has hit the country. Papua New Guinea is a Pacific island nation located to the north of Australia. So this has been one of the most devastating disasters that we have seen in recent times. At a place called the Enga province, I want you to remember the name of this province. UPSC might ask a map-based question, a geography-based question. At Yambali in Enga province in Papua New Guinea is where the disaster has occurred. This massive landslip or landslide, it has devastated multiple villages located at the foothills, and according to United Nations and other relief agencies which are working at the site, more than 2,000 people might have been trapped. We are looking at a death count of 2,000 plus, and Papua New Guinea is a very poor nation, very primitive nation as well, largely made up of tribal communities. So it will be in no position to overcome the impact of the disaster. So that is why many foreign countries and global organizations have already stepped in to assist Papua New Guinea. So the development itself is not too important, but the place where it has occurred could be relevant for the exam. So the landslide has occurred here at the Enga province, which is located in Papua New Guinea. India has very good relations with the country. In fact, last year, PM Modi visited the country. India has promised big investments and assistance to Papua New Guinea. All right? It's part of the FIPIC initiative, which is led by India. India is working with Pacific Island countries. We are working with the Pacific Island Forum, right? We interact with all the Pacific Island nations located in the South Pacific. So last year, the FIPIC summit, the Forum for India Pacific Island Countries Summit, it was hosted in Papua New Guinea, and PM Modi participated and announced a lot of investments and assistance to all these countries, including Papua New Guinea. So where is it located? It's to the north of Australia. You can see here in the map. This would be Australia here, right? This is where Papua New Guinea or PNG is located. Capital would be Port Moresby. You can see the Solomon Sea, which is part of the South Pacific, and this would be Southeast Asia over here. It's next to Indonesia, Timor-Leste, right? And to the south you have Australia, and to its east you have the other Pacific Island nations. So just know the location and where exactly the landslip has occurred. It has occurred in the Enga province at the Maip Muritaka area. So based on this, a map-based question might be asked by UPSC in your prelims. Next, on page number 4, we have an article related to environment and ecology. The article is referring to the Segur Plateau in Tamil Nadu. The Segur Plateau is in the news because it is a very important elephant corridor. It's also called Segur or Segur. The Segur Plateau, it's part of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve itself, right? And it's a very important elephant corridor. It's a migratory corridor for elephants that move from Tamil Nadu to Karnataka. So what's the development? Why is it in news? And why is it critical from an environment perspective? Let's understand this quickly. The controversy is that the article is referring to a political controversy. a Tamil Nadu minister has stayed at an illegal resort in the Segur elephant corridor. That is the news. The news is irrelevant for us. What matters is the controversy, because why are there illegal resorts here and why is it such an important elephant corridor? Those are the things we need to understand. See, in the Segur elephant corridor, right, it actually serves as a connection between Mudumalai National Park in Tamil Nadu and Bandipur National Park and Tiger Reserve in Karnataka. So it's very much part of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. So you can see Mudumalai Tiger Reserve and National Park here. And there are important places like Masingudi, Bokapuram. All right, so in between these two, this is where your Segur elephant corridor lies. This is the Segur plateau that you're looking at. Understood? So this is a migratory corridor for numerous elephants that move from Tamil Nadu to Karnataka or from Tamil Nadu to Kerala towards Wayanad. The Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve is a tri-junction. It's located at the tri-junction of Kerala, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. And there are multiple protected areas. You have the Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary, Mudumalai National Park and Tiger Reserve, then Bandipur and Nagarhole National Park and Tiger Reserve in Karnataka, right? So in this area, a number of resorts had come up. If you're from South India, right, I'm sure you would have heard about Masingudi, very popular tourist location, multiple resorts, so-called eco-friendly resorts had come up. And tourism was a booming industry over here. And by the way, Ooty or Udagamandalam is very close by. So this entire stretch is a popular tourist location. The problem was between Masingudi and Bokapuram in the Segur Plateau, which is a migratory corridor for elephants, multiple resorts had come up which were declared as illegal later by the Tamil Nadu government, and it was upheld by the Supreme Court as well. The resort owners fought a case recently at the Supreme Court. A committee had been set up to look into the claims, and all the resorts have been deemed as illegal and they are bound to be destroyed because they were built right in the path of the elephant migratory corridor. So that is why the topic is relevant, because it is related to environment conservation and how, in the name of ecotourism, we might be encroaching on wildlife habitats. Now coming to the last article for today, on page number 12, the article refers to an operation by the NIA, the National Investigation Agency, which is our premier counter-terrorism agency. It has arrested few people in the country on charges of human trafficking. Human trafficking is nothing but human smuggling, forcefully smuggling people out of the country into some other country and pushing them into hazardous work. So this is human trafficking. So for India, there is a concern which has emerged in Southeast Asia in the Golden Triangle region. I'm sure some of you would have heard about the Golden Triangle. If you haven't, please pay attention. Golden Triangle is this region in Southeast Asia that includes Myanmar. It also includes Laos PDR and Thailand. These three countries, along with parts of Cambodia, they are considered to be part of this region called the Golden Triangle. This is a global hub for organized crime. It is a global hub for all types of organized crime, from drug trafficking to arms trafficking to human trafficking to even wildlife trafficking. All these criminal illicit activities are very rampant in these areas because large part of the area is densely forested. You have very weak governments. Myanmar is going through civil war, political crisis. There are a lot of corrupt governments, especially at the local level, from Thailand to Laos to Cambodia to Myanmar. So rampant government corruption, weak police, weak intelligence and law enforcement, and the terrain and the society as well, the social structure as well. The region is affected by ethnic armed insurgencies, right? So as a result, it has become a hub of all types of organized crime, and this region has an impact on Northeast India. Northeast insurgents from Assam, Nagaland, Manipur, etc., they all have connections in the Golden Triangle, from where they smuggle drugs, arms and weapons, right? Insurgents infiltrate into the area as well. So there is a direct border security and internal security problem for India in the Northeast. But this development is slightly different. It's not related to drugs, insurgency, or arms. It's related to human trafficking and online frauds, which has been escalating on a large scale. Yesterday, we discussed the fraudulent calls and messages that we all have been receiving on WhatsApp, on regular SMS, or even through phone calls. Right? You're tricked, you're duped by various scamsters, either to invest in a fraudulent scheme, or they basically place you under digital arrest, making you believe that you have actually committed a crime or you've been involved in some kind of illicit activity, and they force you to make ransom payments. So all these frauds, scams are essentially being committed by a number of fake call centers which have come up in Laos and Cambodia. All right, there is an entire illicit cartel, illegal criminal cartel operating here, which is involved in cyber crimes, online frauds and scams. They have connections with Myanmar and even with China. There are many online gambling centers, scam and fraudulent centers that are operating here. Almost like tech park or let's say a software company like setup is provided in many of these areas where many employees are actually hired from other countries. And believe it or not, many Indians are employed here. Not by will, but they have been tricked, they have been duped. Many Indian software engineers who are looking for a job abroad, because it's always a fascinating thing to go work abroad, to have an on-site location, right? So many Indians look out for such opportunities. They approach middlemen, middle agents. So what they do quite often is that they promise them a job in Thailand or Vietnam, right? That appears to be a genuine job offer because there are IT companies, tech companies in Thailand, Vietnam, etc. So these middle agents who are working in India, duping the Indian youth, they will have connections with the human trafficking cartels and the cyber crime cartels operating here in Golden Triangle. So they will secure them a job in a fake company in Thailand or Vietnam, get the visas processed, and the Indian youth, the software engineers, they actually think they got a job, a lucrative job. They are very eager to fly out and work in the country. But the moment they land in Thailand or Vietnam, they are kidnapped and taken to the forests of Cambodia and Laos, where they are forced to work in these scam centers. That's why most of the fraudulent calls you get from here, right? You will have an Indian speaking on the other end. They'll speak Indian languages because many Indian engineers have been forced to do this work. They'll not allow them to leave. They are essentially trapped by the cartels. They snatch their passports, they threaten them, they pay them very minimal wages, their living conditions are very horrible, right? So this has become a major concern, not just a cybersecurity concern, but the violation of rights of Indian engineers who are being pushed into the online scam industry here is a major concern. Recently, we have rescued many such Indian youth who were trapped in Laos and Cambodia. The Indian missions here have been able to work with local authorities and rescue a lot of Indians, and they have been brought back safely to India. So now our intelligence agencies led by RAW IB, along with NIA, which also deals with human trafficking, counter-terrorism, they have been targeting these middle agents, middlemen who are involved in smuggling the Indians illegally, and those who are responsible for pushing the Indian youth into these scam centers. So NIA has acted against some middle agents and they have been arrested on charges of human trafficking. That is the development reported here in this article. So on this note, I bring today's discussion to an end. Please take down the practice questions. The two questions are based on what we studied earlier. So use those points in the same structure to write an answer and post your answers in the comment section below. So I hope today's session has been useful and I hope you have learned what we have discussed. If you did benefit from the session, do press the like button, do share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it for today. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.